Hi. I just reviewed the thing you're about to watch, and I'm keeping the screw ups and everything in it. So anyway, this is my towel day video, and it's a premiere. And thank you for coming to the premiere. And I'll see you in just a sec. Well, I'll be reading in just a sec. You're seeing me now, right? And you'll see me later. Okay, whatever. This is like a live. See, this is why I don't do live. I just lose it. Hi, everyone. I'm really sorry I wasn't able to set up the live stream, but I was able to do this and set it up as a premiere. So if you're watching this on Premiere, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. And happy Towel Day. I got my towel here. It's my Maryland Terrapins, University of Maryland Terrapins towel. So yay, go Terps, go Terps. And happy Towel Day. And as it happens, it's also Memorial Day where I live in the United States of America. So happy Memorial Day as well. So during these rather trying times of pandemic and so forth, it's kind of nice to think about the words "don't panic" and keep them in mind at all times. In any event, it's always good to celebrate Towel Day, one of my favorite days of the year. So what I'm going to do is read you the first portion of, the prologue, if you would, of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, one of my favorite books ever, and I will follow it up with a short bit from Chapter 1. And so let us get started. Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 98 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet, whose ape-descended life forms are so amazingly primitive that they still think digital watches are a pretty neat idea. This planet has, or rather had, a problem, which was this. Most of the people living on it were unhappy for pretty much of the time. Many solutions were suggested for this problem, but most of these were largely concerned with the movements of small green pieces of paper, which is odd because on the whole it wasn't the small green pieces of paper that were unhappy. And so the problem remained. Lots of the people were mean and most of them were miserable, even the ones who wore even the ones with digital watches. I screwed that up, sorry. Many were increasingly of the opinion that they'd all made a big mistake in coming down from the trees in the first place, and some said that even the trees had been a bad move, and that no one should ever have left the oceans. And then one Thursday, nearly 2,000 years after one man had been nailed to a tree for saying how great it would be to be nice to people for a change, a girl sitting on her own in a small cafe in Rickmansworth suddenly realized what it was that had been going wrong all this time, and she finally knew how the world could be made a good and happy place. This time it was right, and it would work, and no one would have to get nailed to anything. Sadly, however, before she could get to a phone to tell anyone about it, a terrible, stupid catastrophe occurred, and the idea was lost forever. This is not her story, but it is the story of that terrible, stupid catastrophe and some of its consequences. It is also the story of a book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Not an Earth book, never published on Earth, and until the terrible catastrophe occurred, never seen or even heard of by any Earthman. Or woman, presumably. Sorry. Nevertheless, a wholly remarkable book. In fact, it was probably the most remarkable book ever to come out of the great publishing corporations of Ursa Minor, of which no Earthman had ever heard either. Not only is it a wholly remarkable book, it is also a highly successful one, more popular than the Celestial Home Care Omnibus, better selling than 53 More Things to Do in Zero Gravity, and more controversial than Ulan Khalufid's trilogy of philosophical blockbusters, Where God Went Wrong, Some More of God's Greatest Mistakes, and Who Is This God Person Anyway? In many of the more relaxed civilizations on the outer eastern rim of the galaxy, the Hitchhiker's Guide has already supplanted the great Encyclopedia Galactica as the standard repository of all knowledge and wisdom, for though it has many omissions and contains much that is apocryphal, or at least wildly inaccurate, it scores over the older, more pedestrian work in two important respects. First, it is slightly cheaper, and second, it has the words, "Don't Panic," inscribed in large friendly letters on its cover. But the story of this terrible, stupid Thursday, the story of its extraordinary consequences, and the story of how these consequences are inextricably intertwined with this remarkable book begins very simply. It begins with a house. Chapter 1. The house stood on a slight rise just on the edge of the village. It stood on its own and looked out over a broad spread of West Country farmland. Not a remarkable house by any means. It was about 30 years old, squattish, squarish, made of brick, and had 4 windows set in the front of a size and proportion which more or less exactly failed to please the eye. The only person for whom the house was in any way special was Arthur Dent, and that was only because it happened to be the one he lived in. He had lived in it for about 3 years, ever since he had moved out of London, because it made him nervous and irritable. He was about 30 as well, tall, dark-haired, and never quite at ease with himself. The thing that used to worry him most was the fact that people always used to ask him what he was looking so worried about. He worked in local radio, which he always used to tell his friends was a lot more interesting than they probably thought. It was, too. Most of his friends worked in advertising. On Wednesday night it had rained very heavily. The lane was wet and muddy. But the Thursday morning sun was bright and clear as it shone on Arthur Dent's house for what was to be the last time. It hadn't properly registered yet with Arthur that the council wanted to knock it down and build a bypass instead. Now that, folks, is a great opening. I mean, you got a prologue to kill for, to die for, whatever, and then you have that scene. I just love that opening, because when I read it, it reminds me of what it was that brought me to Douglas Adams in the first place, which was watching the original BBC series. I just fell in love with it at the moment, I think, the show started. I loved it. Anyway, I will just end by saying, keep calm and carry on. And I would have worn my Doctor Who shirt, but I couldn't find it. Douglas Adams has connections with Doctor Who. I figured it would have been great. I'm wearing my Doctor Who socks, so for what that's worth. And I will just say in conclusion, don't panic. And I may not have gone where I intended to go, but I think I have ended up where I intended to be, possibly. Thanks for listening, and have a great rest of your day.